The first thing I noticed was that the Christmas lights were still on. Even though the house was supposed to be empty, that realization hit me as I stood frozen in the snow-covered driveway, my breath coming out in shaky white clouds, my phone vibrating nonstop in my pocket with missed calls I was too scared to answer. Something had already gone wrong, deeply irreversibly wrong, and I knew it before I ever stepped back inside. The kind of wrong that doesn't fix itself. The kind that follows you. I need you to understand this before I go any further. I didn't believe in Christmas horror stories. Not before that night. I thought they were exaggerated, made-up tales people told for attention, something creepy to listen to while driving late but never something real. That belief died the moment I saw a shadow move behind the living room curtains I had personally closed before leaving. As I was supposed to be alone. And yet someone or something was already there. It was Christmas Eve just past midnight. The world was quiet in that unnatural way it only gets on holidays, like even time itself was holding its breath. No cars. No voices. Just the distant hum of wind pushing through bare trees and the faint jingle of a decoration I didn't remember hanging. I remember thinking one simple question over and over again. If no one was supposed to be here, who turned the lights back on? My stomach dropped before my mind could catch up. That heavy, sinking feeling you get right before bad news, before an accident, before something you can't undo. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at my own reflection in the window, my face pale, eyes wide, framed by the warm glow of Christmas lights that suddenly felt wrong. Mocking. Like the house was pretending everything was normal. It wasn't. I tried to convince myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe I forgot. Maybe the timer malfunctioned. Maybe stress was playing tricks on me. But none of those explanations could account for the slow, deliberate movement I saw just then. A shape crossing the hallway, blocking the light for half a second. Not fast. Not accidental. Intentional. That's when my phone buzzed again. A text this time. From an unknown number. You shouldn't be outside. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat locked up as if my body already knew screaming would only make things worse. I checked the message timestamp, sent 30 seconds ago, meaning whoever sent it knew exactly where I was, knew what I was doing, knew I was standing there, staring at my own house like it no longer belonged to me. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I backed away from the door, heart slamming against my ribs, every instinct telling me to run. But run where? The nearest neighbor was half a mile away. Snow crunched loudly under my boots, each step sounding like a gunshot in the silence. Then the porch light flicked on. Not all at once, just a soft click, followed by that warm yellow glow spilling over the steps, illuminating fresh footprints in the snow. Footprints that weren't mine. They led from the porch straight into the woods behind the house. And that's when I realized something that still makes my blood run cold to this day. Whatever was inside my house didn't come from the road. It came from the forest. And it hadn't left. Because right then, right as the wind picked up and the Christmas lights began to flicker, I heard the front door unlock from the inside. Slowly, deliberately, as if whoever was in there already knew. I was about to come back in. Before that night, my life was painfully normal. Quiet, predictable, and honestly a little boring in the best possible way. My name is Daniel, I'm 29 years old. And up until that Christmas, the scariest thing in my life was deciding whether I'd overcook the turkey or not. I was staying at my parents' house for the holidays. A modest two-story place tucked near the edge of a forested neighborhood in northern Pennsylvania. It's the kind of town where nothing ever really happens. No crime stories on the news. No sirens at night. Just snow, trees, and people who wave when they pass your car. I'd grown up there, knew every creak in the floorboards, every squeaky cabinet hinge. The house felt safe because it was familiar. It was Christmas Eve, just a little after 11 p.m. My parents had gone to stay with relatives 2 towns over, and I volunteered to stay behind to keep an eye on the house. Honestly, I didn't mind. I liked being alone there. The silence felt comforting, especially during the holidays when everything else felt loud and rushed. I had spent the evening doing simple, ordinary things. Wrapping last-minute gifts at the dining table. Watching an old Christmas movie I'd seen a dozen times. Drinking hot chocolate while snow fell gently outside the windows. The Christmas tree stood in the corner of the living room, glowing softly, ornaments reflecting tiny points of warm light. The heater hummed quietly, and every now and then the house settled with a familiar creak. Nothing felt wrong. I remember feeling calm, content, maybe even a little nostalgic. Being back in that house always made me feel like time slowed down, like the world outside couldn't touch me there. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't distracted. I wasn't scared. My biggest concern was whether I should stay up to watch midnight roll in or just head to bed. Around 11:30, I realized I'd left a small box of decorations in my car. Cheap plastic lights I planned to hang on the back porch rail earlier but forgot. It annoyed me more than anything. I debated leaving them until morning, but I figured I'd just grab them quickly. It would take less than a minute. I put on my coat, slipped on my boots and stepped outside into the cold. The air smelled clean and sharp, the way it only does after fresh snowfall. Everything was still, peaceful, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the only person awake in the world. I grabbed the box from the back seat and stood there for a moment, just looking at the house. The lights glowed warmly through the windows. The tree was visible from the living room, its stars shining faintly. It looked like something from a postcard. Safe, inviting, home. That's the thing people don't tell you about moments before something terrible happens. They don't feel dramatic. There's no warning music. No sudden dread. Just normal thoughts. Normal breaths. Normal life. I remember smiling to myself, thinking how nice it was to have a quiet Christmas for once. I had no idea that was the last moment I'd ever feel truly safe in that house. Because less than a minute later, before I even reached the porch steps, the normal world I trusted so completely would begin to crack. And once it did, nothing about that house would ever feel the same again. When I stepped back inside, the warmth of the house wrapped around me like a blanket. I kicked the snow off my boots, set the box of lights by the door, and locked it behind me. The familiar click of the deadbolt should have made me feel secure. Instead, it made the silence feel heavier. At first, I didn't notice anything was off. I hung my coat, stretched my arms, and glanced toward the living room. The Christmas tree lights were still glowing, blinking slowly in their gentle pattern. The TV was still on, muted now, snow falling across the screen of an old movie scene. But something about the house felt different. It's hard to explain. Not wrong. Not dangerous. Just slightly misaligned, like a picture frame hanging a fraction of an inch crooked. You don't notice it at first, but once you do, you can't stop staring. I brushed it off and walked toward the kitchen to rinse my mug. Halfway there, I heard a sound. A soft thump. It came from upstairs. I froze, mug in my hand, listening. Old houses make noise, I told myself. Pipes shift. Wood contracts in the cold. I'd heard 100 strange sounds growing up here. Still, I stood there longer than necessary, waiting to hear it again. Nothing. I exhaled, almost laughing at myself, and continued into the kitchen. As I turned on the faucet, another sound reached me, this one quieter. A faint dragging noise, like fabric brushing against carpet. I shut off the water. The sound stopped immediately. My heart began to beat a little faster. Not panic, just alertness. That instinct you get when something doesn't line up with what you expect. I listened closely, straining to hear anything else. The house was silent again. I told myself maybe I was tired. The holidays had been long. My mind was probably filling in gaps. I dried the mug, set it in the sink, and walked back toward the living room. That's when I noticed the temperature. The house felt colder than it had a few minutes ago. Not dramatically so, but enough that I paused and looked at the thermostat. It read the same as before. The heater was still running. Yet the air felt thin, like warmth was being pulled out of the room instead of circulated. As I sat back down on the couch, I became acutely aware of how alone I was. Every sound felt amplified, the ticking of the wall clock, the soft buzz of the lights on the tree, my own breathing. Then I felt it. That unmistakable sensation of being watched. I didn't see anything. Nothing moved. But the feeling pressed against the back of my neck, making the skin prickle. I shifted on the couch, glancing toward the hallway that led deeper into the house. The darkness there seemed thicker than before. I told myself it was ridiculous. I'd lived in this house for years. There was no one else here. I'd locked the doors. I knew that. Still, I reached for my phone and checked the time. 11:47 p.m. As I did, the tree lights flickered. Just once. I stared at them, waiting for it to happen again. They continued glowing steadily, as if nothing had happened. I swallowed and adjusted my position, trying to relax. That's when I heard it again. Footsteps. Not heavy. Not rushed. Slow. Measured. They came from directly above me. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The steps crossed the room upstairs, stopping exactly where my bedroom would be. Right over the living room. I waited for the sound of a door opening. Or another step. Nothing came. The feeling of being watched intensified, spreading through my chest like ice water. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing for explanations that felt thinner by the second. This wasn't just the house settling. This was something else. And whatever it was, it seemed to know exactly where I was sitting. The footsteps upstairs didn't fade the way normal house noises do. They didn't trail off or dissolve into creaks and pops. They simply stopped, abruptly, deliberately, as if whoever was walking had chosen to stand perfectly still. Right above me. I slowly stood from the couch, my legs stiff, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The air felt heavier now, thick and oppressive, like the house itself was pressing down on me. Breathing suddenly took effort. Even the Christmas lights seemed dimmer, their glow weaker, strained. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely louder than a whisper. The sound of my own voice felt wrong in the space, swallowed too quickly by the walls. I waited for an answer, my dad's voice maybe, a neighbor's, anyone. Instead, I heard something that made my stomach drop. A slow exhale. Not from upstairs. From the hallway behind me. I spun around. The hallway was empty, but the darkness at the far end no longer looked passive. It felt intentional, focused. The sensation of being watched exploded into certainty. Something was there just beyond where the light from the living room could reach. Then the smell hit me. Cold air. Dirt. And something rotten underneath, faint but unmistakable. My pulse spiked. My body screamed at me to move, but fear rooted me in place. I strained my eyes, trying to make out shapes in the darkness. That's when it stepped forward. First, I thought it was a shadow shifting. But shadows don't detach themselves from corners. They don't move against the direction of the light. This thing did. It was tall, too tall. Its head nearly brushed the top of the hallway doorframe, its body unnaturally thin, like it had been stretched. Its skin wasn't quite pale and wasn't quite dark, just a sickly gray that absorbed the light instead of reflecting it. Its face looked wrong. Features were there, but arranged incorrectly, like someone had tried to remember what a human looked like and failed. The mouth hung open slightly, lips cracked and dry, pulled into something that might have been a smile. Its eyes were fixed on me. Not blinking. Not moving. Just staring. The house went silent in a way I didn't know was possible. Even the clock stopped ticking. Even the heater cut out. It felt like the world had narrowed down to just me and that thing in the hallway. I knew then with absolute clarity that I wasn't imagining anything. This was real. And it had been inside the house the entire time. I took a step back and the floorboard creaked beneath my foot. The thing reacted instantly. Its head snapped slightly to the side, like an animal listening for prey. The smile widened, stretching its face in a way skin shouldn't stretch. A low sound escaped its throat. Not a growl, not a voice, but something wet and eager. That broke whatever spell I was under. I turned and ran. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I bolted toward the front door, my boots slipping on the hardwood as panic flooded my system. Behind me I heard movement, fast now. Too fast. Long limbs slapping against the floor, closing the distance far quicker than anything human could. The lights flickered violently as I ran, plunging the house into stuttering darkness. The temperature dropped so suddenly my breath fogged in front of my face. I reached the door, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the keys. The sound behind me was right there now, close enough that I could hear that uneven breathing, feel the air shift as it moved. I fumbled with the lock, every second stretching into agony. And just as my fingers wrapped around the door handle, something brushed against my shoulder. Not grabbing, not pulling, just a light, deliberate touch, like it was reminding me how close it was. That was the moment I knew, without a doubt, that if I didn't get out of that house right then, I wasn't going to survive the night. The door flew open, and I burst into the freezing night air like I'd been shot out of a cannon. Snow crunched beneath my boots as I stumbled down the porch steps, nearly falling face first into the yard. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. Every instinct screamed that if I turned around, even for a second, it would be right there, close enough to touch me again. The cold hit my lungs hard, burning as I sucked in air. My heart hammered so violently I thought I might pass out. Behind me, the front door slammed shut on its own with a force that rattled the windows. I ran. Not toward the road. Not toward the neighbor's house. Toward the trees. I don't know why. Fear scrambles logic. The forest line loomed dark and endless, swallowing the faint glow of the streetlights. I plunged into the snow, branches slashing at my face, my breath coming out in ragged gasps. The world narrowed to sound and movement. My boots slipping. My pulse roaring in my ears. The unmistakable noise of something moving behind me. Fast. Too fast. I could hear it crashing through the underbrush, snapping branches without slowing down. Whatever it was, it didn't need to watch where it stepped. It knew the forest. It belonged there. I risked a glance over my shoulder. I wish I hadn't. Between the trees I saw it moving, its shape blurring as it ran, limbs bending at impossible angles. Its eyes reflected faintly in the moonlight, locked onto me with a predator's focus. It wasn't chasing blindly. It was hurting me. I veered left, then right, my legs screaming as adrenaline pushed me beyond exhaustion. My foot caught on a buried root, and I went down hard, the impact knocking the breath from my chest. Pain exploded through my knee. I scrambled, hands clawing at snow and dirt, forcing myself upright just as something slammed into the spot where my head had been a second earlier. I didn't stop to see what it was. I ran again, deeper into the trees until my lungs felt like they were tearing apart. The forest grew denser, the darkness thicker. My flashlight, when had I dropped it? Panic surged as I realized I could barely see my hands in front of me. Then I saw it. A small hunting shed. Old. Half-rotted. Barely standing. It wasn't much, but it was something solid, something with walls. I threw myself at the door, yanking it open and diving inside just as the sound of pursuit reached the clearing. I slammed the door shut and shoved my shoulder against it, heart pounding so hard my vision blurred. The shed shook. Something hit the door from the outside, hard enough to make the hinges scream. Dust rained down from the ceiling. I pressed my weight into the door, teeth clenched, fighting the urge to scream. Another impact. Closer this time. I could hear it breathing on the other side now, slow, deliberate, almost curious. A hand scraped across the wood, fingers dragging slowly, testing. Then suddenly silence. Seconds passed. Then minutes. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My entire body trembled as adrenaline drained away, leaving behind raw terror. Just when I thought it might be gone, a shadow passed across the crack beneath the door. It lingered. Then it moved away. I waited long after the sounds faded, long after my legs went numb. When I finally dared to push the door open, the forest was empty. Still. Silent. I ran again, this time toward the road. By the time I reached the nearest house, pounding on the door with frozen, bloodied hands, I was sobbing so hard I could barely speak. I survived. But as I stood under the neighbor's porch light, wrapped in a blanket, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't escaped. Not completely. Because deep in the woods behind my parents' house, something had let me go. And I didn't know why. The police arrived just before dawn. By then I was sitting at the neighbor's kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug I couldn't feel, staring at the wall while they asked me the same questions over and over again. My clothes were torn. My knee was swollen and bleeding. Pine needles were tangled in my hair. But according to them, nothing I said made sense. They went back to the house with me once the sun came up. Daylight should have made everything feel safer. It didn't. The house looked normal, perfectly normal. Christmas lights still glowing. Trees still standing. Front door closed and locked. Locked. I watched one of the officers test it twice. No signs of forced entry. Inside there was no smell. No cold air. No footprints. No long scratch marks. No sign that anything had chased me through the house. Even the thermostat read the same as it had the night before. They checked upstairs. Every room was empty. My bedroom, directly above the living room, was untouched. Bed neatly made. Door exactly how I'd left it. They found my phone on the couch where I dropped it. Still charging. Still playing the same Christmas movie, paused mid-scene. One officer pulled me aside and asked gently if I'd been drinking. Another asked if I'd been under a lot of stress lately. I knew that look. The one that says we think you imagine this. The only thing they did find was my flashlight, half buried in the snow near the tree line. The lens was cracked. The batteries were dead. They asked me how it got there. I didn't have an answer. My parents came back later that morning. I didn't let them stay in the house. I didn't even step inside again. We packed what we could and left that same day. They tried to argue to calm me down, to tell me it was probably just fear layered on top of exhaustion. I didn't fight them. I knew what I'd seen. Weeks passed. Then months. Life moved on in the way it always does, dragging you with it whether you're ready or not. I stopped talking about that night. People stopped asking. But I didn't forget. Because sometimes late at night I still wake up with that same crushing feeling in my chest, the sense of being watched. And when I do, I swear I can smell it again. Cold air. Dirt. Rot. Last Christmas I finally went back to the house. Just once. Just to prove to myself that it no longer had power over me. The new owners were friendly. A young couple. They laughed when I asked if anything strange had ever happened there. Said the house was quiet. Peaceful. Perfect for the holidays. As I was leaving, the woman hesitated. Actually, she said, frowning, there is one thing. She told me that sometimes, late at night, they hear footsteps upstairs when no one's there. Slow ones. Careful ones. Always stopping in the same spot, right above the living room. I didn't tell her what that meant. I just nodded, got in my car and drove away. As I pulled onto the road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For just a second, only a second, I thought I saw someone standing at the edge of the trees behind the house. Tall. Thin. Watching. When I looked again, it was gone. But even now, years later, I still wonder the same thing. Did it let me escape that night? Or did it simply decide to follow me home?